Good afternoon. Just 1 minute before 2 o'clock, and we are just waiting for several of our attendees to come on the line. So if you are joining us for Balancing Act Monthly, welcome. You can use your computer audio, or if you prefer a phone call, sometimes that connection's a little better. You can dial 415-655-0052, access code 663-643-977#. And welcome. So 2 o'clock now. We always try to start on time for these things because we know you all are busy professionals. Welcome to Balancing Act Monthly. My name's Brenda Morrison. I am a co-creator of Balancing Act. We're coming to you today from beautiful Denver, Colorado, our hometown and home where Balancing Act is located. And welcome to Balancing Act Monthly. Balancing Act Monthly is a monthly program that we use to share Balancing Act success stories with our Balancing Act clients and for future clients. It's really a learning opportunity, a chance for you all to ask questions to your peers and to hear about different ways that communities utilize Balancing Act's suite of tools. And we are thrilled today to invite Kathy and Megan from Roseville, California. And the topic for today, as many of you know, is Engage Roseville. And as several of you saw in our blurb, Roseville, California has just completed a very dynamic, comprehensive public engagement campaign on their budget. And you are all in for a treat today. Those of you that are actually listening, sitting at your computers with your headphones, and for those of you that will listen to this at a future date. So as I said earlier, Balancing Act Monthly is a monthly occurrence that we do in order to demonstrate different ways that communities use Balancing Act. We do it every monthly. We will send you an email that tells you the different topics, and today we are focusing on Roseville. But as you can see from the screen, we've done several different communities. Norfolk, Virginia has highlighted some custom questions. Charlottesville talked about their reporting. And today you are in, as I said, you are in for a treat to hear about Engage Roseville, which was, they implemented a comprehensive 360-degree approach to resident engagement on the budget. And we couldn't be more thrilled that Kathy Cullen and Megan McPherson are taking some time out of their busy day to share with you and with us their methodology, their strategy, and their results with our Balancing Act listenership. And so we'll take this is scheduled to go to just 2:30. So we'll spend a few minutes listening to Kathy and Megan, and then we'll open it up for discussion if there are any questions, although I know that many of you are multitasking at the same time, and then we'll be done. But in the meantime, I'd love to introduce you to your presenters today, and I hope you can see their lovely faces on your screen. On the left is Kathy Cullen, and on your right is Megan McPherson, and they are from Roseville, California, and they are going to tell you a little bit about themselves, Roseville, California, and Engage Roseville. So at this time, I'm going to change over the screen. Might want to, I know there's a little background noise. I think they're just getting a little situated out there in Roseville, but I'm going to go ahead and change presenters right now and change the screen. So here you go. Kathy, Megan, it's all you.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, we're happy to be here today and to share with you our Engage Roseville effort. We wanted to tell you a little bit about Roseville first. We're located northeast of San Francisco in California, the second largest city in our region, the capital region surrounding Sacramento. We're a net importer of jobs. We're not just a suburb. We actually have more people coming into work than leaving every day. We were established in 1909, and we have 136,000 people living in Roseville. One of the things about being established that long ago, our community back then and still today has a spirit of local control and self-determination. We own our own electric utility. We own our own, all of our utilities, wastewater, water, solid waste, parks, recreation, 3 libraries, public works, police and fire. And in California, a lot of those services in cities are provided sometimes by the private sector, as the case with electric utilities, or through joint powers authorities. So we're pretty unique in that our city actually owns and controls all those services our residents enjoy. And we have, in our budget, we have a $500 million budget, and that's a big number. That's because we own an electric utility. That's pretty much the reason there. Our general fund budget, though, is $137 million, and we mostly get revenues there from sales and property taxes. We have a $2 million operational deficit at this point, and that's in contrast to the $14 million structural deficit that we're dealing with. And that's if we were to fully fund all of the infrastructure needs we have. Our pension costs are going up. And like most cities in California in particular, we're feeling the impact of slowing revenue growth and increasing expenses. And that slowing revenue growth comes from consumer trends shifting, a combination of that, and then also California's sales tax structure. So in California, we don't tax for services like lawn services, if you get a haircut, none of that is taxed. So as people are shifting from buying goods like a lawnmower to buying services like lawn services, cities and municipalities lose out on those sales taxes. We also, the way that our collection is for online sales tax, the way that's distributed by the state, we're missing $3 to $4 million a year that we otherwise would collect if all those purchases were done at a register. So we're facing these problems, and we're explaining to the public these aren't just because of city management. This is actually trends larger than us, and we're really proactive at addressing this. So in 2017, last year, our city council asked us to develop a way to raise awareness about the budget issues, find out what our community prioritizes the most among the city services we have, because we were going to use that information to make cuts to services, because not knowing whether or not we have additional revenue sources, what we do know is we have to close the budget gap. And if you want to learn more about just the entire effort we did, we're going to give you a brief overview today, but you can go to engageroseville.com. That has links to all the videos we did. We produced videos providing information. We also aired our meetings, different meetings that we had. We have results from surveys. So all of that information is there. And just to give you a quick, picture of what Engage Roseville was about. At the bottom is an overview of the different outreach methods we used to raise awareness of what we were doing. So everything from in print, like billboards and flyers, to video, to online social media, different online components, podcasts, and then with all of that awareness information, we were hoping people would get kind of an educational base about municipal budgets and the kind of services we provide. Then we engaged with our community, and we did that in a variety of ways that are listed there. I'm going to go through each of those. And then that information was provided last month to our city council, the results of all those efforts. The first outreach method we used was the Community Priorities Advisory Committee. We had people submitted applications, and the council appointed 20 members. They represented a variety. We had at-large members, and we also had members from the school district and the chamber and such, and also our Planning Commission, Utilities Commission, Parks, Recreation, and Libraries Commission. And we had 9 months of biweekly meetings with this group. We had our 5 general fund departments presenting, and that's police, fire, parks, rec, and libraries, development services, and public works. And we focused on those because they were the largest percentage of our general fund budget. So when we looked at cutting, we were going to get really the most bang for the buck in looking at those services. And so we we had this group prioritize discretionary services. And the way we defined that are services that weren't mandated by law, or mandated by including our charter, or specifically funded by restricted revenue sources, such as grant funding and special taxes collected and fees, such as for services provided. So the second outreach method we used, and this whole focus of Engage Roseville was on those discretionary services. We used FlashVote, and that is another digital platform. It allows anyone to sign up for free. You don't have to live in the place where you sign up, but you have to have that URL in order to sign up. So this allowed us to promote this with our business community, or with people who use our parks and libraries, for example, or who enjoy shopping here, so that they could also have a voice in how to prioritize our services. Over the course of this, we significantly increased the registered users, and we ended up with 1,442 in the 6 surveys that we did. And we had a response rate in the about 30%. And we really found this to be helpful. It was very quick. The idea is that there's 3 to 4 questions. You do it on your mobile phone, and the responses have a level of statistical validity once you hit a certain percentage of the population participating. So that helped. We were at plus or minus 4% validity or error on that. And we asked our participants to rank the discretionary services within each of the 5 departments. The first survey was a general awareness survey of what the city's facing. The third method we used was the in-person community conversation. Basically, with all of these methods, we didn't want anybody to be able to say, I wasn't able to participate because, for whatever reason, I don't have a computer, or I'm too busy, or I can't come to a night meeting, or I can't come in the daytime, or whatever. So we tried to offer every type of way for someone to engage that they would feel comfortable with, have the means to do, and the time of day to do. So the community conversation filled one of those goals, and it was an in-person opportunity. We had 120 participants. We were able to accommodate everybody that wanted to come. We mailed a brochure to each household, all 60,000 households in Roseville, to invite people and to explain the problems that we are facing. And we want to show you a brief video about this. It's only 50 seconds, I think. It's loading up there. It's really worth it.
And while it's loading, I just want to remind, for those of you on the webinar, I see there's several of you. Please raise your hand if you have a question.
People were able to vote in real time, and you'll see that occurring here in a second. using their iPhones. They were also able to give us comments that were displayed there and that created word clouds of the most prominent comment words used in comments. So it was something that people very much enjoyed. They enjoyed being able to ask questions and hearing what their neighbors were saying too. And our fourth outreach method is balancing act. And so to use balancing act, we had a different approach than when we first learned about balancing act. We wanted to use it in a different way. We built in a $2 million deficit, and we asked the users to allocate the funds among the discretionary services in order to close that gap. So when they did that, we were then able to, in a different approach, see what their priorities were for services, for the discretionary services. Throughout, we allowed them to submit questions and comments, and we had over 30 pages of that. And we also had 1,200 views of Balancing Act and 322 submissions in the first 2 weeks. And Chris was telling us that was a very high conversion rate of 25%, because the national average he's seen was 10%. And one of the big reasons we think we had that is because we used Balancing Act at the end of the 9 months that we were doing this outreach. So we've been, you saw the outreach methods on billboards and e-newsletters and these meetings. So for people who are really involved or marginally involved in what's happening in the community, they were aware of these methods. And so by the time Balancing Act came out, they could take a deeper dive into learning about our budget. And I'm going to turn that over to Kathy now to take it from there, because she's our budget expert.
So I want to give you a quick demonstration of how we set Balancing Act up. And you'll see as we go through here that it really wasn't about the numbers, but it was more about the priorities. The numbers that we assigned for each discretionary category that we included on here were estimates. They were proportionate to the total, but this in no way depicts our total general fund budget of $150 million. It's just the discretionary portion in the 5 largest departments. So when we started putting this together, we did it a few different ways, and we learned quite a bit along the way. I'm going to give you a slide at the end with some of the lessons that we learned. But one thing we found right up front when we tried to do this by putting in a lot of detail and exact numbers was that we spent a lot of time, and when we went to close the gap, it took a half an hour or more. And we didn't think that residents would be willing to input that amount of time to go through here and learn this. So we tried to go to each department and narrow down to just their top 5 or 6 discretionary services and assigned a value to those. And then we also, based on feedback we got on our internal rollout, adjusted the minus category here to create a 10% reduction rather than just a 1%. Then in our confirmed change screens, we included the kind of the consequences of if you cut this, what that means, so they could understand what impact their decisions would have. And so then they could go in and close this gap, however they saw fit, and submit it along with changes. This $2 million obviously has to get to 0 before they could submit a scenario. So as you'll see, each one of these categories doesn't have more than 6 or 7. This one maybe has 8 categories in there this one's $2.6 million. So it's quite summarized. So let me go back to the presentation. And so we kept this open for a few weeks and got the results. And then we had to figure out how we were going to use what we got out of the system. So we decided to start with the CSV file that the system creates and then use Excel and pivot tables to analyze the data. So we just copy and pasted the CSV results into one tab of a spreadsheet and then calculated the reductions and calculated average cuts and then compared the average cut of each category to the beginning balance of each category to come up with a percentage. And for our ranking purposes, the discretionary services that had the highest priority were those that had the lowest percentage cut, and the discretionary services with the highest priority, the lowest priority had the highest percentage cut. So I'm going to give you a quick look at this spreadsheet that we used. So this is the original data. Actually, the original data starts in this cell over here. But this line includes the beginning balance. So you can see just looking down here, development services, this category started at $25,000. And most people left it, here's a person that cut it in half, and here's a person that cut it completely. But this category didn't really receive a lot of cuts. Where when we look at some others, you'll see that a lot of them did have substantial cuts made. So the first thing I did was create a tab to calculate how much money was cut in each scenario from each category. From there, I summarized them by department, by category. So in total, this particular category was cut by $1.2 million across all 300 scenarios we received. I then took that as a percentage of the original scenario and calculated a percentage cut. So that's how we determined a ranking of priorities based on the submissions that we received from the Balancing Act feedback. Some of the other things we used it for were to ask questions. We asked, one question was, how would you close the budget gap? And as you can see, we had over half of the respondents indicate that they would support raising taxes or fees over reducing or eliminating services. We also asked if they felt they were getting their money's worth for their tax dollar, and overwhelmingly, most people said that they did feel that way. So this was really good information for us to have. So once we had all 4 outreach methods completed, we presented that to City Council for their consideration. We used that information to close the general fund budget gap for this upcoming year. And we also used it just as a knowledge base of what priorities are. So in the future, we will know if we have to make budget cuts, what areas are the public is most tolerant towards doing. Our conclusion that we reached was that we were able to close the $2 million gap we had initially started with for the 2018-19 budget. It was interesting that the feedback from all 4 outreach methods had similar themes. So we were able to know pretty definitively what the public's priorities were. We presented those priorities to the departments for them to use to meet their budget targets. And then based on the feedback that we presented to Council, City Council directed staff to explore revenue enhancement options for this coming up budget year, such as utility user tax, transient occupancy tax, and half-cent sales tax adjustments. So let's talk about some of the things that we learned throughout this process. First and foremost, we needed to have buy-in from the top. Without that, we wouldn't have had the access to the staff time required to create a lot of these outreach methods and to do the work that we needed to do. We also learned that we needed to set up the analysis with the end game in mind. So that way, when we set up Balancing Act, we learned along the way what our end game goal was, and if we had known that from the beginning, we could have saved quite a bit of work. We also had a little bit of difficulty identifying discretionary services. That's not always an easy task. The department struggled with what was essential versus what they could stop doing because it's all important. We also learned that less is more, so we went through several iterations of the Balancing Act model. Because we wanted as many public responses as we could get, we wanted the model to be quick and easy as possible to complete. With each review, we'd combine services to get to a more and more summarized level, and our thought was that if we had more than 5 or 6 categories in each department, people would get discouraged and not complete the exercise. Speaking in plain English was also important. We stayed away from acronyms and explained things in as few words as possible so that they could understand. In the end, we went with large rounded numbers that were proportionately correct in order to make it quicker and easier to explain and understand. The numbers aren't important. It was the end game of what are the priorities. So we initially started with precise budget numbers and then rounded to thousands and then to 100,000s before we were done. Another thing that we learned by the end was that what we should have done from the beginning was wait until we finalized the content in Balancing Act before actually entering it into the software. So initially, we put the data into Balancing Act and then met individually with departments to review and update it. There was no real good way to distribute the data for review when it was in draft format in the Scenario and Balancing Act. So it was much easier to distribute, provide multiple levels of review, and edit the data in Excel during the working phase. Once we did that and got all of the edits, we then were able to easily copy and paste the data into Balancing Act once it was final. We also rolled out the model to internal city staff prior to public rollout. There were only 3 of us that really were involved at the highest levels of getting Balancing Act completed, and we were so close to the work product that we couldn't see the forest for the trees if there was some glaring issue. So we rolled it out to city staff, and that allowed us to get feedback from people who had different perspectives, weren't so close to the data, and then we used their feedback to make refinements. A few of the things we did were changing the default percentage reduction to 10%, because initially it took way too many clicks for them to completely eliminate a service. We also, in the initial rollout, and well, to this day actually, only created an English version, even though we do have quite a bit of a Spanish-speaking population.
And we wanted to just do a pilot. It was hard enough for us to do the pilot first. We thought if we do this again, or when we do this again, we'll venture in. We had a hard enough time getting the words right in English this time.
And with that, that summarizes our efforts with Balancing Act and Engage Roseville. So we would be open to questions.
Well, thank you. This is Brenda again, and I do see that there's a question for you, both of you, and there are 2 of them, and they're kind of related. Which is, the first one is, how did you tackle possibly some hesitation from either from city council or executive staff on getting resident engagement in the budget process? And the question, so that sometimes sometimes executive leadership and city council are hesitant they want to engage the public, but they're not always sure what the public's going to say. So that's the first question. And the second question, someone writes, which is, it's right on. They said, boy, you did all types of engagement. How did you all convince your city council and city manager that you needed to do this kinds of things, and how did you convince them to give you the budget to engage the residents?
Those are really great questions. We were wondering those things ourselves around the early part of last year. And so engagement is one of our city council's goals. They have 11 goals, and community engagement is one of them. So luckily we had a buy-in on a philosophical level that we were starting out with. And the way that engagement had been done and had been to set up a committee. That was the go-to method that our city had used in the past, and there had been a very extensive committee process for the designing of our downtown about 15 years before this. But what had happened in those 15 years is the entire world had changed. So we sat down at our first meeting, dusted off the old binder, and I'm sure people are familiar with this, and said, how did we do this last time? And so we're going down that committee path, and the committee path was a very important element of this. But, if the end result of this was that there was a desire to not just cut services, but maybe maintain them and increase revenue instead, we had to make sure that the community had a solid understanding of how different municipal finance is from our personal checkbooks and also from business and the private sector. We're subject to so many different rules and regulations at the private sector, and we don't have to deal with in our personal lives. So we knew we needed an understanding. And then with that understanding, we also wanted that to build trust with staff, and trust that we have taken steps for years, and you'll see this throughout our engagement pieces at that website. We had taken steps for years on labor contracts, because as a service organization, labor is our biggest expense, and pensions are in the headlines every day. So we wanted people to know what we did with salaries, going to market median, reducing the increase, and reducing pensions for new employees, and that we're doing everything that we're able to do within current state law. And so to build that trust and that communication, we also didn't want it to be seen, if we just did a committee, as the club that got to decide everything. And I think that from a city council and a city management perspective, that dilution of influence and to spread that around many groups, and to not make it the exclusive right of any one group to have undue influence in the process, was very appealing. And so with that, anybody could sign up for Flash Vote. Anybody could input through Balancing Act. Anybody could send us a phone call if they didn't want to, if they didn't have a computer, for example, or if they wanted to send us an email at any time of day. They didn't have to watch anything or sign up for something and wait for that particular time. We wanted to make it open. And so I think that our management understood the power of digital engagement. I think the hesitation that still remained was, what do we do with all this input that we get? So we've constructed Q&As, and we've also going out to community meetings, and we're seeing some themes in terms of understanding. And that's really just given us some great information on things that we need to explain differently or explain more fully to our community. And I think that's where the buy-in comes in, is if the ultimate goal is to give us as many options as possible at the end, we need to build trust with our community, and we need to use a lot of tools so that they understand anybody can participate and it's a transparent process.
So the listener who asked that question just wrote, "Thank you, big explanation point." So
oh, good.
So yeah, unless there's other questions, we are at the end of our time. We actually went 3 minutes over, but everybody,
we're happy to answer any individually too.
That would be great. So they can either contact us, or I think they can contact you directly in Roseville if they have questions, because our listeners did stay on this webinar the entire time. And there is much, much more they had a very rich, engaging process. So I would encourage our listeners to look at the Engage Roseville site, that there's tremendous amounts of information there. And if you have any questions, I was talking to Kathy earlier and Megan, they know that the municipal world is a sharing community, and they are happy to share their wisdom and their experience with all of you. So thank you. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Roseville. And we'll see you.
Thank you, Balancing Act.
Yes. Oh, well, thank you. And we will be back next month. Please check again our website under abalancingact.com under the Learn tab, and you will find a full recording of this in a few days if you would like to share it with your peers. So thank you very much and have a wonderful day.